was at my beach the other day. Well, not my beach, I just call it my beach. And I was getting ready to do one of my many ceremonies, and a very important scene was playing out, not for me, but with me in it. I feel like this is an important scene to share and to talk about because not only was this showing me a moment of transition, but also the collective sensibility shift that I have been observing in the spiritual community, both online and offline. And so as I was getting prepared, it was, just as we were getting close to sunset, it was a beautiful vermilion sky. I found a spot that was fairly isolated, fairly remote. I don't like to do my stuff around people. I don't care if people watch. I just don't want to be bugged. However, there were a couple of people around me at the time, within about 100 feet of me. And on my right, there were two young boys, maybe between the ages of 8, 10, 11, and they were building all kinds of things out of the driftwood. Very elaborate shacks and clubhouses and buildings. And they were just grabbing everything that they could, and, they were building a raft. I don't think they were going to take that raft off into the Sound and then eventually into the ocean, but it was a very interesting raft that they were building. And then on my left, there was an older gentleman who was approaching me with his dog. And here I was in the center, the median of both age groups. His dog approached me first. His dog was very, very friendly, just basically came and jumped me and started licking and playing, and eventually he came to get his dog. And we got to talking about my crystals and my stones and, what was going on. He wasn't necessarily talking so much about spirituality, but he wanted to know about the stones because he was a bit of a rock hound, a bit of a collector. He loved agates. He liked to go into the mountains and into eastern Washington to go and find rocks, and his son would make rings out of them every once in a while. And so I thought that was really cool, and it was just a friendly, get to know you kind of chat. And then we shook hands, and then he walked on. And in that moment, there was this realization that this was an important scene of resolution and unification that was going on, that was aligning me with a different sense of role or a different context of maybe a part that I play in the greater whole, spiritually, socially, however you want to look at that. Because my mind was immediately brought to the sacred Trinity. And for those of you who are maybe followers of a nature-based path, or you are pagan, or you are familiar with, all kinds of Trinity symbols and things like that, I do observe the Mother, Maiden, Crone, the Father, Son, Sage Trinities, or you might say the Maiden, Mother, Crone, or the Son, Father, Sage Trinities. And when I was looking at that, it wasn't just so much about me, but it was this unification of all three archetypes occurring at once. Not that he was the sage and I was the father and they were the sons, but more like a unification of the sage, the son, and the father in the boys, the sage, the son, and the father in him, and the sage, the son, and the father in me. And the reason that is significant, as far as I'm concerned, is because we are coming at a very interesting point where a lot of different cycles, astrologically, socially, spiritually, are all coming up for resolution. We are at the end of a 30-year narrative when it comes to the Saturn cycle. And you can see that when you look back at different narrative continuums throughout the course of even just recent history. Each decade has its own sort of part to play in an ongoing 30-year narrative. So as we step into the 2020s, Saturn entering Pisces, we are closing up a 30-year continuum, a 30-year narrative. And just as the 90s, entering into 1993, when Saturn went into Pisces, well, that is when there was the closing up of the 30-year narrative of the 60s, the 70s, and the 80s. Now, when I bring up Saturn in astrology, a lot of astrologers out there are going to be like, but Saturn doesn't go into Pisces until 23, and that's true if you're going by Western tropical astrology, which I am. But you always feel the final moments, the closing points before that transition. And so August, September, October, November really, is still the January 2023 experience. And the reason I think that this was significant is because it is closing up a lot of other stories and other three-part narratives in my life and a lot of people's lives that I have been observing. It's closing up 9-year narratives, it's closing up 6-year narratives, it's closing up 12-year narratives, it's closing up 15-year narratives. And it's all playing out in different areas of people's lives depending on what's going on and how it's most prominently affected them. For some people, it's their relationships. For some people, it's their careers, as I do feel it is for me. For some people, it is maybe in their spiritual path or practice or their family, what have you. I'm approaching a turning point myself. My birthday is coming up here on September 11th. And then on September 22nd, I'm going to be having the 9-year anniversary of being in business on YouTube. Now, for a lot of you who maybe found Integrative Mysticism first, I want you to know that this channel is actually new. And I've had other spaces where my work has been shown for a long time before just this. A lot of you are familiar with Sonofselene, formerly known as Scarlet Moon. Some of you may be familiar with the Practical Tarot Tutor, and a lot of you remember me from Scarlet Moon Magic as well. So I'm wrapping up 9 years, right? There's a Trinity 333, and going into a whole new phase with my work. And I thought that maybe I would like to kind of just share a little bit about what it's been like, not only for 9 years, but also for 12 years, being a spiritual practitioner that has been involved in the social media portion of the spiritual world for longer than I've been in business. Because, I've been here since about 2010, late 2009. And the interesting thing about that is that I've pretty much been here since the very beginning of a lot of these spiritual, pagan, new age, paranormal, psychic channels, and all of these things coming up, all of this content coming in YouTube's infancy, in Facebook's infancy, or at least in Facebook's infancy as it relates to being available to the general public. I've observed a lot of changes that have taken place. And I was at first motivated to make kind of a call out video because I had observed a lot of people on a few groups that I'm a part of on, Facebook and Reddit and things like that, where people were complaining about TikTok teens posting spiritual content, whether it's new age content or spells or magic or witchcraft or the paranormal, psychic, whatever. I kind of got angry when I saw all of these people my age and older, right? The fathers and the sages, though you don't have to be, between the ages of 35 and 50 to be a father. You don't have to be over 50 to be a sage, etc. I know some 60-year-old sons, and I know some 25-year-old sages. It's really about what you're capable of embodying. But I took exception to that because, once I went on TikTok and I looked around to see, well, what is this witch talk thing? What is this new age TikTok? What is spiritual talk? What is this? What's going on here? What is this newfangled crap? I looked through and I didn't see a whole lot different. I didn't see a whole lot that was really different than what's already been out here. And what I noticed that most of the resentment was being thrown at was actually at people that were showing their work, what they were crafting, what they were making, right? They were making their oils. They were showing off their altars and their creations, their demonstrations, their exercises, their techniques. Yeah, some of them were posting things that, kind of were a little bit iffy in terms of maybe legitimacy, but for the majority of the stuff that I saw anyway, I was seeing people that were actually doing in short form a lot of the same stuff that those of us who were here from the beginning started this whole thing with, which was a focus on the work, showing our work, engaging in conversations, and talking about technique and talking about practice. People who loved the work, people who loved the paranormal, people who loved cleansing and energy exercises, people who loved spells, people who were in it for the actual application of metaphysical ability and the study of real spiritual work and applied metaphysics and applied magic. And I thought it was strange that so many people were throwing resentment in that, until I realized that a lot of the people that were throwing the most resentment were actually people who had no work to show for their own path whatsoever. And really, they only came into these groups or came into these YouTube circles or came into these Facebook groups or whatever, looking for instant community. And we're just sort of treating it like a big self-help metaphor and turning it into a meeting, if you get my drift. I take exception to that, because if you're going to say that TikTok teens and young people who are invading this space are coming and invading it, talking about moon water and dream pillows and seances or meditations or channeling or energy work or psychic self-defense, and all you're doing is treating it as a means of getting attention and energy because it's easy community, you might actually be envious of the fact that they can do the work and for some reason you can't bring yourself to do it. Because I know plenty of spiritual circles out there that are pretty much just mixers and there's no real work getting done at all. And a lot of people in there are just looking to talk or write weird, emotionally inappropriate Dear Diary entries to get instantaneous affirmation and attention, network, or to sell things. And to be perfectly honest, that wasn't how it always was. And in my opinion, the original invaders, the original incursion, started with people like that. 2009 to 2014, the golden age of pioneers and artisans. And as YouTube evolved, 2008 to 2009, a lot of independent creators started to become more bold in sharing their work and connecting with a greater global audience, and things became more conversational and more connected. And when it comes to the New Age world or the spiritual world, the paranormal world, the pagan world, the magical world, the root worker world, that was no exception. And what was happening is that you saw a lot of people coming on and ultimately sharing information and technique and theory and experience from spiritual practices that they had been nurturing and working on for a lot longer than social media had been available to any of us. A lot of us have been at this for a good long while. I started my formal path and practice back in 1998, but I've always been naturally psychic. In 1998, I was in junior high, and so I built a lot of my practice out of whatever books I could find through friends or through Walden Books. And Walden Books doesn't exist anymore, just to give you context. YouTube became kind of a haven for spiritual artisans in a big way. And from there were a lot of cool little communities starting to build, people getting more engaged with one another and helping to further each other's progress in their own work, while also even help, yes, spiritual business grow for those who wanted to run a spiritual business. People had ways of educating themselves, easier access, right? You no longer had to just hope there was maybe a metaphysical or an occult store within 45 minutes of your house. You had places you could go to really connect with people. Yeah, social media had been around a little bit. You may have had a live journal or a MySpace or a Witchvox back in 2005, but this is very different. This is a lot more access to a lot more of what you want. And back then, YouTube tended to give more attention to keywords than it does now. And so people were finding what they wanted more specifically, a lot more easily. And when I started engaging with the online spiritual community back in 2009, it wasn't as, Son of Selene or as Scarlet Moon or anything like that. I was a Seattle Soothsayer because I was still already reading tarot and I was reading runes and I was, already well established in a lot of my practice. But I wasn't in business yet. I was working a regular job and I was really just there for more of the social element, while also learning and studying ways that I could go forward to step into my personal goal, my personal wish, which would be to own a brick and mortar center of some kind, be it an occult shop or a metaphysical shop or maybe even a retreat center. And that still is something that I aspire to do one day. But the climate of that community was a lot more engaged. And regardless of what path you were coming from, you could not only find something, but there was, for the most part, a great deal of mutual respect and curiosity about how to learn and get more, because the people who were attracted to this stuff and looking to this stuff had already been working on their path for some time before coming online. Those were both the providers and the viewers. Now, of course, this was going to be attractive to new people who were coming into their path or having their own awakening of some kind, through 2010, 11, and 12. The 2012 craze really got a lot of people interested in the spiritual arts. And so it was a space where you could go to, of course, study. Now, at that time, you did have, yes, these moments where certain pipelines to, say, less than reputable characters were also getting established, right? You, of course, had all kinds of different spiritual paths that maybe would have had pipelines to, political extremism via conspiracy theory and things like that. But those were in very, very small minority. And the culty, narcissistic spiritual leaders were more often than not more heavily scrutinized and overtly scrutinized and called out before they could actually get any kind of real traction. And there was no such thing as the gaslighting, girl boss, pseudo new age, certificate waiver. We didn't have any of those things. It really was, again, a place for the artisans and the people who were sincere about learning and the people who were sincere about teaching and sharing. And so after a few years of making friends and, yes, even making a name for myself with bits of content, I decided, well, you know what? Why not? Why not try and step into the world of professional spirituality? And so as we got into 2013, I decided I was going to start doing horoscopes, astrology horoscopes, tarot forecasts, and also at the same time teach my experience when it comes to the spiritual path, my findings when it comes to exploring things like paganism and Shinto and Gnosticism and ceremonial magic and a lot of my New Age studies and things like that. Bring them all together. Have a talk about that, because we all have something unique as a priority that we are bringing to the table while exploring these works. And of course, a lot of I've got my fingers in many different pots. And I was one of the original, 25 to 30 readers on YouTube doing any kind of tarot forecast or horoscope content. I was there with all of them in the beginning. And there are a few of them that actually got to be pretty big names that do credit me with being there in the beginning and helping them to get started even on their path. Nadia Shah did that publicly last year. Some people have not credited me at all, but well, I'm kind of glad I don't have my name affiliated with them. But I was there in the very beginning, and things were growing very, very quickly in 2013 because a lot of this was starting to become more legitimized, and what needed to become mainstream was becoming mainstream. And by the time we actually got to September of 2013, I was able to, establish myself as a business. I went out and I, did all the necessary business license document stuff, and I was good to go. It wasn't long after that I ended up quitting my regular job and just committed full time to doing online readings. YouTube had loosened up its restrictions when it comes to monetizing your videos and becoming a partner, and that made things really easy. And it also made it more accessible to people who would like to be able to profit in some way from their art and from their labor. And so, from 2009 to 2013, it was a golden age for a lot of this community. And I feel that as we got into 2014, we were hitting this peak goodness point. Everybody who wanted to find somebody could find somebody. And there were so many interconnections of very positive relationships that if you couldn't find what you were looking for, you sure as hell could get a referral almost instantaneously to what you wanted. And there really wasn't a whole lot in the way of controversy or scandal or anything along those lines. Yes, there was the occasional witch war, but this was before the trolls dragged the world into their basement. And this was also before the mass incursion of the wounded healer grease trap a lot of people fell into. However, as we got to the end of 2014 and transitioned into 2015, things started to shift. 2015 to 2019, the Age of Instability and Avarice. Now, the reason I'm saying the end of 2014, the beginning of 2015, is because while a lot of the cracks started to show and a lot of seeds got planted in 2014 as a lot of things became more mainstream and accessible, it really wasn't until 2015, end of 2014, that you got to see just why this was going to be a bigger problem for real creators. And a lot of this had to do with not just what was going on in the political sphere. That certainly did not help, because a lot of these spaces, spiritual groups, paranormal groups, conspiracy groups, and things like that were starting to turn into pipelines for political extremes. And that also was something that was very visible when it came to, a lot of the sort of 12-step program, recovery program, recruitment cells, I guess you could say, for the far right and far left. But what was really happening in 2015 was sort of the meeting in the middle. And, there was an opportunity I saw for a quick reversal of that trend that nobody bothered to try and assess. And so there was this kind of all gas, no brakes mentality going on, because a lot of these people in these communities were really loving the golden age and wanted to make it go on forever. And they didn't really see that maybe a lot of profiteers were looking to capitalize on that. Maybe not necessarily just for money. There sure as shit was a lot of that, though. But there were also people that were coming just simply for control, for influence, for their own narcissistic needs, whether it was overtly grandiose narcissist or it was parasitic, covert victim narcissism. A lot of that was already there. And that was when a lot of the cult leaders and the girl boss shit started to really take off. And you also had this flood of wounded wannabes and wounded brats coming in, seeing an easy way to make money from home. And that is when you had this dramatic influx of a lot of twisted, predatory psychics, predatory channelers, predatory readers, fake witches, fake root workers, fake healers, and of course, lest we forget, the Grand MLM Pyramid Scheme Certificate Program, now rebranded as Masterclass Mayhem. Throughout the course of 2015, the battle was not going well for the original intent of these communities. Or let's just say the organic spiritual process, or those who came about their work and their talents and their skills organically, or for those who maybe were hoping to maintain an organic, healthy community. It was not going well for us at all. In fact, I'll say it right now, we lost. Because with that also came a great deal of trenderism that pulled in a lot of people that really only came here for instant affirmation, instant community, easy money, or so they thought, or a way to kind of just play the algorithm or play the system for whatever short-term goal or short-term phase they were in. And it reached so many fever pitches, so much feuding, so much scandal, so much spectacle, that a lot of the original creators and a lot of the people who really did put in the work just kind of stepped away. And to be perfectly honest, as we got to about 2018, 2019, if I hadn't already established a business for myself and was basically using this to solely support myself, I would have walked away as well. Because to be honest, I was losing a lot of love for what this all meant and who it was for. And my worst nightmare was that this was how it was going to be forever. And a lot of people don't know this, but I've had my own challenges that I don't really speak about publicly. You might call them micro traumas associated with all kinds of bizarre interactions, crazy stalkers, or people who are trying to ultimately, infiltrate my work in order to run some kind of political agenda of their own. One time I had somebody accuse me of being the cause of a death in her life, the death of her pet. She had me convinced for an entire month that I was the reason her cat died. And I was completely just distraught. And then later, after that month, she came back and says it wasn't my fault at all. She put me through it, harassing me, blowing up my stuff all the time. By the way, this was somebody who once aspired to be an astrologer herself, just to let you know what kind of crazies are out there. I have every email and every Twitter message saved, of course. That's going to stay on the hard drive and, forever. People like her were kind of taking over this community in their own twisted ways, their own broken ways. And at some point, my patience and compassion was so exhausted that instead of leaving like everyone else was leaving, shutting down their channels, walking away, no longer interacting like I wish I could, I decided that I was going to do the opposite. And 2019 and 2020, I decided, what? I'm just going to talk the way I do with my friends. I'm going to just bring out all of my crazy and all of my spiritual jargon. I'm going to see what I can do to repel some of these unstable and dysregulated, emotionally toxic people. That did not repel enough people, in my opinion. And I only turned that around because a really cool viewer just told me that I was throwing out the baby with the bathwater, essentially. He told me I was becoming inaccessible, and when I realized that what I really wanted to do was drive them out, not everybody, I decided to try and come back and be more approachable. And so I did, and that's how, things kind of turned around for me there. But as I started to do that, I noticed that the online spiritual community was kind of wrapping up the crazy phase. A lot of people were becoming a lot more critical of things that they used to say, just let them have their journey about. A lot of people were becoming a lot more responsible, a lot less incurious, and a lot more vocal about challenging dysfunctional and unhealthy behavior in what it was. Now, of course, you have the diehard cultists and the people who will, fall on the cross for a narcissist, even though they claim to hate them in other circles. But people were waking up out of the dream they thought meant being awake. And that reinvigorated me in a very big way. As we go further into the 2020s, we're seeing this sensibility shift that I mentioned at the beginning of the video already start to evict so much of that incursion, so much of that infection that came into this community at the end of 2014, beginning of 2015. 2022 and beyond, the Age of Reverence. To bring it all around full circle, I think that, interestingly enough, a bunch of TikTok teens and Instagram kids wanting to show off their crafts and their candles, wanting to talk about meditations and seances and ghosts, wanting to talk about technique, is a sign that we're going back to a wholesome simplicity where real creators are able to really have a spiritual community that is actually reverent of the work, as opposed to being something that is an aberration. And with that, I have hope, because guess what? Everyone is welcome so long as they have reverence and love for the work and for the path as it really is, and not all the distortions making people think it was what it was not. Anyone who wants to have that reverence and take part and do the work and enjoy a real magical spiritual life with community can do that. so long as they're putting in the work. When we are at our best, we are like a university or an abbey or a temple. There's all kinds of different spaces for all kinds of different services, right? Halls for lectures, labs for practicing, right? Sacred spaces or shrines, as well as, yes, even a bit of infirmaries for those who want to do the healing work and enjoy that, and that's a part of their path. And even spaces where we may get to show off our wares, show off our findings, and demonstrate our skills. And spaces as well where we can work better to help people who are just coming here to learn, or our potential clients, or our potential audience members, or potential customers. But when things get thrown out of balance, or it becomes something that is a debased, corrupt perversion of the very idea, it needs to be destroyed and rebuilt fresh. I think that's what we're doing right now. And so I don't think there's anything wrong with what's happening with the people that are actually doing the work. We're closing this story up. And with every new beginning is a fresh start and a clean slate for all of us. And I say, let's just lean in. So I don't see this as a symbol of negativity or trouble ahead. I actually see it as the collapse of trouble that's been. And that has basically been a very abridged summary of my YouTube journey so far, from pre-business 2009 to 2013 and post going into business 2013 and beyond. I hope you guys enjoyed this little story. I would love to hear what you guys think, and if any of you are connected to or are OG YouTube content creators, feel free to make a video reply or video response. I would love to hear from you and maybe some of your accounts, and who knows, maybe we can all get together and share some stories, both good and horrific, in the days and weeks to come. So thank you so much for sitting with me this whole time. It's been very cathartic. I feel like I'm wrapping up again a big story as I close up my 36th year in a physical body and 9th year in business. Y'all take care, and I will see you all again soon.